You are listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are doing, is it the Midnight Rambler or just Midnight Rambler? The Midnight Rambler by Don Carr. But Keely, how's your week been?
My week has been okay. Uneventful, just been going with the flow.
Yeah, my week was crazy. I was like, I made it through February, you guys. I made it. I know when you listen to this, it'll be in March, but it is February 29th. It is leap day. Woo! Woo-hoo. And I made it. My week was crazy. Let's see. I went to Florida. I came back. I had a bridal shower, and I go to Texas next week. I am racking up miles this year. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it'll amount to anything, but I'm going places. So basketball's over. Oh yeah, basketball's over, and did we record something? We didn't. Cameron's team won the championship. Ooh. They were undefeated all season. Go 4th and 5th graders. So at least all my time was not in vain. So that's done, and now she's like, oh, I'm gonna do track. So there. Anyway, whatever. So, do you have the blurb?
I do, and just a heads up, I am going to butcher some of these words. So, all right. Often mocked as a water cop, EPA Special Agent Sophie Grant has faced countless dangerous situations while chasing criminal polluters from the boarding tankers at the Sea of Somali refugee camps. But when she is assigned to Italy's tourist-filled Amalfi Coast in pursuit of a toxic waste dumping cartel, she finds herself in the crosshairs of legendary Camorra assassin something Ramingo.
I think it's Ramingo. Oh, the M word. I don't know what. Yeah, I can't say
Mezzanotte Ramingo. The Midnight Rambler. And is forced to do the most harrowing thing, ask her disgraced ex-cop father for help. But like the deadly polluted water flowing below the sun-splashed Amalfi bedrock, nothing is as it appears. The CIA aims to use her as bait. But Ramingo hasn't killed seemingly impossible to reach politicians, judges, and Camorra rivals for years without learning to sniff out a trap. All right, I struggled through that.
It's okay. We made it. So, well, I guess I'll do this first. So, if you had a word to describe this book, what would it be?
I would say... See, I've been thinking. I've been struggling, too. I would say... I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's fine. I don't have like a great one. All I kept thinking this entire time I read this book was super spy. That's all I kept thinking.
I was thinking something along those lines, but I'm like, I don't know that I can nail down a word.
A word, yeah, or operative, nothing great. I mean, very obvious.
I'm like, watch me tonight be like, oh, I know a word.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. No, so this book is, I believe, is this his first book?
I think so.
I think it is his first book.
Yes.
And so we were happy to review it. So The Midnight Rambler is, like I said at the end of the last episode, it gives me very much James Patterson, which is what I grew up reading, was my mom's James Patterson books. So if you like detective type books like that, I'm trying to even order some. I can't think of some other. What's the other one? Dean Koontz.
Dean Koontz.
Yeah, James Patterson. It's very much that style. of those like authors. This is probably something that you would enjoy reading. It's a little bit different.
Grisham, I think, is another one.
Oh yeah, he is another one. This is different than what we've read. And definitely had action in it. I will say it's very educationally written.
Yes, very eloquently written too. Very technical.
Yeah.
Which was cool.
Yeah, you do have to get like kind of past that. I did not, for note taking, like write down a lot of like the technical terms for things. But like it wasn't something like it that I couldn't have read. I mean, obviously I read it. So, and you don't have to really like know what that stuff is to read it either. But yeah, this author definitely did his research when it comes to environmental like waste and things like that. So this book, it takes place in Italy around like the Naples area and Mount Vesuvius. I did know that word.
I did too. I was like, at first I was like, oh wait, I know that word.
I know Mount Vesuvius. And it has several different, there's not like, I mean, I feel like Sophie is the main character, but lots of people get their own point of view. So Sophie is American, and she works for the Environmental Protection Agency. And so she is over there because there's lots of toxic waste dumping. And we're not just talking about like, I throw my trash outside. We're talking like horrible waste that are polluting towns and causing cancer in the townspeople, and people, you know, kids are being orphaned and all kinds of horrible things are happening.
Think Aaron Brockovich.
Ooh, yes. So she's over there, and there's also a undercover CIA agent over there who has some Americans who are in the mob, whatever, from Kansas City, who have flipped. And so they are supposed to be trying to bring down an Italian mob, basically, and things go awry. And so Sophie and this other agent, they end up teaming up, but somehow or another, she ends up needing to enlist the help of her father, who she is very estranged with and has a very strong distaste for. And so not only does she have to work with him, but a lot of her personal history becomes uncovered because of that. They also are working with the Italian police while they're over there, and there's a lot of intertwined parts when it comes to that. So, I mean, like, it is like an action thriller, not like spooky or anything like that, but it is action. I mean, yeah, if you know what Dean Koontz and Grisham and Jane Patterson, you know how they write, this is that. So, you know, that's pretty much what I have to say about it. That's spoiler free. So if you have not read this book, is this book released?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it is, because I
released.
I was on his Instagram and he had posted it in bookstores. So yeah, it's out. So you could have read it, but if not, if you don't want to be spoiled and you have not read this book, then pause here and come back after you finished. If you don't mind being spoiled, or you've already read this book, then let's go ahead and get started. So we open up with Sophie, and she's kind of actually reflecting back on her time. She went to the University of Colorado, and she's at the medical center, and she says it's the night of the swimming dead. So basically, the medical school was built on an old athletic center, and they store corpses in the pool. Like, I'm not wrapping my brain around whatever that is. Like, that doesn't seem ethical, sanitary. None of that seems right, but somehow they have this like pool full of bodies, and basically once a year they do this dare where there's like race across, like swim through corpses.
Yuck.
That is disgusting. I'm not even gonna pretend I'm gonna do that.
When I started reading it, I was like, that is
so dangerous.
Sure this isn't a horror novel?
Yeah, and it's like you can die from like the exposure. You cannot, like, formaldehyde alone is deadly, let alone whatever. Like, a pool full of corpses does not seem like a sanitary place to be. So she has been dared to race Gary, and she calls him a trustafarian. Basically, he's a trust fund kid, and he ends up like throwing up, and they both get suspended, but they don't get expelled because he's rich, and so since he doesn't get expelled, she doesn't get expelled. And she basically says, like, she did end up suffering a cough for a week, and she's had nightmares ever since. Which, yeah, I'm sure. Like, they dived into bodies in a pool. That's disgusting. And for her to become an environmental agent, I'm like, I can't believe you did that. I cannot believe you did that. So now she is the special agent in charge years later, and she is in Italy. She spent the last years chasing down like most wanted people environmentally, which is kind of funny because I know the environment's not a joke, but like people don't take it's not like murder. Like people don't take it as serious as that.
Yeah,
so like,
is this a real thing?
I know, like I'm like I need like is the EPA a real thing? Like it's just like what are you wanted for? Oh, like toxic waste dumping. Like it's just like, and that is and we need to take the environment very serious. So please recycle and don't pollute and drive less. But it's just like funny to think about. So she's happy to be back in leadership because she actually was demoted for a little bit, which we'll get into later. And she works again for the Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S. She has a partner. His name is Tommy Jones, and they're basically briefing their team on whatever their current mission is. Their target is there's basically a bunch of leaking toxic waste from the mountain or from Mount Vesuvius, the volcano. And it's leaking into the drinking water, and there's a town full of people with adults and kids dying of different types of cancers. And some of the guys are giving her a hard time, which makes her think back to how she beat Gary. So not only did she like dive into this pool and Gary threw up and got sick, she was actually the only person who has ever actually swam across this body of pool, because other people have attempted and never made it all the way across. She swam across. I don't even know how that's physically possible.
Yeah.
Are they in water? Like, I'm not understanding.
And even if they're in water, like, how?
That is not sanitary. This is not a body farm. Like, I don't know. And also, I love body farms. I think that's so cool. But that's not, I don't think you're allowed to do that. So, whatever. So she is on Mount Vesuvius with Tommy, and she has to work to preserve their oxygen because they have to wear special masks because there's so many toxic waste. Like some of them are invisible, some of them are like in a pool of like bubbling yuckness, whatever. And like, so they have to wear special masks because you just never know when you're going to be breathing. Plus they're on a mountain, like obviously the elevation and stuff plays with that. And she thinks like how Tommy is like, he's like easy breezy, beautiful cover girl. And she's like struggling, even though she runs like 8 miles a day or whatever. But they're placing these sensors to basically tell them when waste is being dropped. And she also has like this interactive map that shows her where different things are, and they're like different colors for different types. Again, I did not write down the different types of waste because that's above our pay grade.
I think the map thing that she had on her arm, like,
that was... I wonder if it like pops up and you go like, I'm thinking like Black Panther. Like,
that's what I was envisioning. I was like, dude, that is so cool.
I wonder if they have those. They probably really do. Like, I'm sure like the government has all kinds of stuff. But she's thinking how easy her job is because basically she's a woman and people underestimate her all the time. And she tells us she was demoted to fugitive hunting for a while, but she actually, like, her favorite type of fugitive to hunt are those with PhDs because basically misogyny, and because they're so, like, they just so underestimate her for being a woman. So they find a dump of toxic waste when she gets a report that there's a shepherd with a flock that was spotted. And basically the enemy or, like, bad guys or whatever, they're called the Kamara. Mm-hmm. They use shepherds as, like, their lookouts. So she knows, like, they probably know that they're up there. And so now she only has 39 minutes of air left, and she looks up, and a freaking Molotov cocktail is being thrown her way. So basically a shootout ensues, and she starts to, shooting at them, and she tries to run into the woods, and she finds herself by a lake of... I think it's terminium or something like that, but basically a toxic waste, and it's a deadly nerve agent. So she shoots at the guy that chases her, and he fires back, and it nips her ear, but it causes him to stumble into like the toxic waste, and then he literally starts like crying out like, please help me. And he has like black blood like coming out of his like nose and eyes, and her partner Tommy shows up and just shoots him, and it's like, that's like, honestly, that was the best thing he could do for him because he's not getting out of this waste. So he's like, I'm gonna just go ahead and kill you. So Tommy's like, let's go patch you up, but she still wants to make sure she gets the rest of her sensors put down. We switch over to our CIA agent. His name is Carter Boyd. I'm just gonna call him Carter, and he's in a cafe, and he's in Positano. So sorry if you're in Italy and I am butchering these names, which is funny because I'm going to Italy in a couple months.
Ooh.
Yeah, we go to Rome. So, anyways, he's in a cafe and he's pretending to be a U.S. State Department employee and not a CIA agent. So it's funny because like his boss is on his earpiece. His boss's name is Hodges, and he's like, "You need to take a selfie and like post it on Instagram." And he's like, "I'm not posting a selfie." And he's like, "You have to post." He's like, basically like the department wants them to be posting when they're there because it like helps their cover if they like actually interact with their fake identity or whatever. So he does it. And he's actually a senior counterterrorism officer, and he's been tracking Russians who are doing illegal weapon sales in the area. He's also been tracking the Camorra, and he's watching with a drone of their locations. And he has a guy from Kansas City that he's flipped, and he's working undercover from them. So he starts talking to this family. He gets a little distracted because they have a boy there, and he's telling them he should be eating gelato. And all of a sudden, there was a boat or a yacht that he had been watching on the drone, which is where his undercover guy was. It freaking explodes. So he rushes like through the crowd of people coming up from the beach. He rushes down there to the beach, to the pier, and he's trying to get down there. So not only was there a guy on this boat, but his wife was also down there as well. And he had been coaching them, like they're basically going to go into a meeting, and he had kind of been coaching them on how to do all of this. So when he gets down there, the police are already down there as well. And he tries to hide behind like a menu because he's like, because they, you know, you've seen movies. They don't ever like get their permission to be there. And then, you know, it's all like, this is my territory, like a dog pissing contest, basically. So Captain Fattore, I'm assuming. Fattore. I don't know. There wasn't like a accent gras or whatever you want to say on it, but I'm going to say Fattore. I like the way it sounds. She approaches, and she's the commander for the special police force in Italy, and she's working this case. And he like doesn't want her to see him because the CIA didn't tell her that they were in town. But she sees him as he's trying to leave. So he's still down on the beach. Also, Carter like loves to cook, and he's trying to like make this cookbook. And as part of his cover, he tried to like get this cookbook made, and they like denied it. But he really puts the cookbook out there. Like that's actually like a legit thing. I don't know. So he's out on the beach, and Fattore comes up to him, like updating him about the scene, and lets him know they found a body in the water. And she asks him if he knows the person, and he's like, And so his boss is like, get out of there, because she's just basically like trying to dig for information, and she knows that Carter had a drone out here. And as he leaves, he tells his boss that the body in the water was Chris, which was the undercover spy that he had. So he reaches in his pocket and he finds a red cornicello, which I have no idea what that is or what it looks like, but it's some kind of little red marker thing, and it says Memento Mori. And where have we like read that recently? I feel like I don't know, maybe you haven't. I feel like maybe in Crescent City, because I just read Crescent City 3, that was in there. But I have like recently encountered this phrase like a lot lately, and I was like, that's so strange. So I don't know. Maybe I'm having deja vu. I don't know. But it says Memento Mori on it, and he realizes that he must have passed the bomber on his way down to the beach, because that's how he would have put it in his pocket. And he tells his boss he knows who placed the bomb, and he says Il Ramingo. We go back to Sophie, and she is with Maria, who is a little girl from the town who's actually an orphan. Maria lives at an orphanage now, so she's really good at speaking English because they teach them there, but she spends a lot of time with Sophie and Tommy, and she actually stays with them 4 nights a week. And Maria got both of her sensors placed on Mount Vesuvius, and so she's hoping she can track the Camorra now as they dump waste. There's a knock at the door to her villa, and it is Carter, and he is looking for her, and they don't know each other. And he says that he's actually there about her half-sister, Madeline. I'm going to say Madeline. And Madeline Nietzsche. And she is the wife of the undercover spy who they found in the water, and he tells her that she's dead. We switch point of views to Luca Pecora, and he is the head of the Camorra, the Italian drug people who are dumping the waste. And they also call like this mob, they actually call it the system is what they call it. And so he's actually watching this live feed of a man being tortured, and he's like cut all 10 off, like they're cutting off this guy's fingers. And he's partners with the Russians, so that's, you know, again, the reason that Carter's there. So we got the Russians, we got the Italians, we got Americans, we got a lot of things going on. So one of his Russian partners is there, and he's mad about what's happening up on the volcano with Sophie and her team. And I wrote Luca, so I'm going to call him Luca the rest of this time. So Luca had been warned about Sophie because they have a bunch of like ex-EPA agents working for them, and he basically hadn't listened to the warnings. And he doesn't really want to kill a federal agent because it does draw attention to him. And so he's in his warehouse. He has barrels of this toxic waste. And even though they also trade like drugs and weapons, he said that the toxic waste actually pay really well, that is just crazy to me. Like, if that's true, like, that is absolutely crazy. I just would never think, if I'm like, oh, you're a criminal, what do? I do toxic waste. Like, I would never, that's crazy to me. Like, I just would never think that. So he asked his Russian partner, which his name is Andrei Solkovov or something like that, but we're going to call him Andrei. He asked Andrei, like, why are you here? And Andrei says it's because the Americans are watching you and the CIA almost trapped you on that boat. So Luca was who the people on the boat that got blown up, that's who they were supposed to be flipping on and meeting. And we learned that the police have someone in custody who is snitching, and basically Andre's like, I want that EPA agent, I want Sophie killed tonight. Luca's like, no, it's too risky, but I have a better idea, and he says, Il Ramingo. And Andre asks him, will he do it? So we switch back over to Sophie. She is headed to Positano with Carter, and she has to ID the body. And she doesn't know that Carter is CIA at this point. He introduced himself as U.S. Department employee. I don't even know what that means. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know what that means, but whatever. Not CIA. And so she tells him, like, I haven't seen Madeline in 12 to 13 years. So they have the same dad, but Madeline basically replaced her and doesn't like her. And she's like, my dad's an asshole. So, like, she has nothing to do with her family. So they're going back down to the beach where the explosion was, and Captain Fattore is still there. And she tells her, it's not Madeline that needs the ID, it's Chris, who was the husband. And they actually haven't found Madeline's body. And Sophie tells them, I've never met him. I've only seen pictures of him. And she asks, like, can I leave? And Fattore is like, no, because Italian law states you have to accompany the body to the morgue all the way in Naples, which is like an hour or so away. So we switch to another POV, and this is Il Ramingo, and he is like coming down a mountain. He gets a call from someone called DeSalvo, and he is basically following up with them on the bomb. So we learn that he's the one who placed the bomb, and he wants to know, or DeSalvo wants to know, did he find the American? Speaking about Carter, and he says, yeah, he did, and DeSalvo basically tells him, like, you violated the code because there wasn't supposed to... Oh, wait, I don't know if DeSalvo told him this or if Il Ramingo said this. One of them is, like, we violated a code because there's a woman on the boat. So, like, he will only kill men. He will not do women. He will not do children. So, men only. But he hangs up with that person, and he basically, like, destroys the phone and the SIM card and everything. And he knows that Carter is CIA and pretending to be, like, this U.S. Department person, and he also had seen Captain Fattore down at the beach, so he saw everything. And he'd actually like bugged the yacht or the boat that the undercover people were on, so he knew like that Carter had been coaching the Nietzsches about trying to lure Luca onto this boat. And so now he is watching them down there talking to Sophie to try to ID the body. And once they leave the beach, he like changes into like a homeless person like outfit, and he goes up to this plaza, and then he gets up there and changes into this like black uniform and like goes up to the driver of the van that has Chris's body in it. Now we switch to another person. This is David Grantano, and he is in Kansas City. And he is working at he's headed to the Nietzsche's car shop, like a car dealership, but they really don't sell cars. They use it to clean their money. It's a cleaning business. And he goes in there, and his older brother Ray is the one working the desk, and he's basically holding a picture of Madeline and crying. So we learned that like Ray used to be a cop, and Ray tells David like, you shouldn't be here. You never know who's listening. And Ray has basically managed like the car dealership for the last 3 years, and he never allows any of the Nietzsche's like actual people inside because like they try to keep it very like separate from them, so that there's no way they could like, you know, say it's a cleaning business. And so Ray manages that part, like the front, but their boss, his name is Ken Nietzsche, I don't know. He is like who actually does like their finances and stuff like that. Like Ray just manages the business. And so David tells Ray that Ken is also a mess. So we find out that Ray is Madeline's dad and Ken is Chris's dad. So they are both in this like mob together and their kids end up getting married. And David asks, why were they even in Italy? And Ray's like, I don't know. They just told us they were going on vacation. So David says, well, we're planning to head to Italy, and says that we've been summoned for a meeting. And Ray's like, well, that's weird. I thought the whole point of having like international partners was that we're not supposed to meet face to face. And they're starting to think like maybe the death wasn't an accident. So we go back to Sophie, and she is headed to Naples with her partner Tommy and with Carter. And the coroner van is like driving behind them and is like really riding them. And all of a sudden it rams into them once and then again. And Carter's driving, so like he tries to speed off, but they're on this like winding like mountain type beach type highway, I don't know. So they like veer off and they hit the wall of like the mountain. So like they have all these police cars come and a tow truck comes, and they go to search for the van, and they find the van on the side of the mountain. And somehow like Captain Fattore is already on the scene. So when they get there, she is like actually handcuffed to the door handle of her own car. Like she caught up with the van, but whoever was there like got her. And she says he killed the original driver. So basically she had chased the van down, but when the guy got out, he hit her, and then she woke up and the other original driver was dead. And so someone says that they found the driver, and Fattore wants to know, like, why didn't he kill me? Like, why did he just kill this other guy? And on the driver's seat, they find another one of those red cornicellos. So they open the coroner's van, and Chris's body is still back there, but his head is missing now. Yeah, I don't know. And so Carter says, like, I have a guess who it is, but he doesn't want to tell Sophie here, like, in front of all the police. We go back to Ray. He is on a plane with his brother David, with Ken. So that was Chris's dad, and then with Ken's other son, Jimmy. Jimmy is a hot mess. So Jimmy is explaining his latest hustle. So basically, he sells cheap produce at a premium at the farmer's market. Like he buys like non-organic lettuce, puts it in a bag, and says it's organic. Like, what? So Jimmy's a mess. Anyways, so Ken tells them that they're going to be meeting with the Camorra, who are their Italian partners. And Ray, again, he's telling us how he used to be a detective. And basically, the only reason he works for the Nietzsche family is because he made a deal with Ken years ago in exchange for his name, like, being on the car dealership lease. And he, like, also has to, like, eavesdrop on cops. Like, that's his whole thing. So all the men ask Ray to tell them, like, what has he learned about his Italian partners. And he basically, like, tells them, like, you know, what he knows, which isn't a ton. And Ray asks, does Luca know who killed my daughter? And Ken says, like, that's what we're going to find out. So Ken wants to make sure that Ray is in the room when they talk about the kids being killed, because Ray is just really good at sniffing out like BS. And he asks, do you think Luca was involved? And Ken says, maybe. So Ray asks, should they be worried about being ambushed when they get there? And David says, maybe, but they brought reinforcements. So they brought some guys with them. One of the guys named, they call him BTO. I can't remember what that stands for. They tell us at one point, it's not important. But he's like a big Viking type dude. Like he's a big dude. He's like ex-military, like he's badass. So they brought reinforcements. Ray asked Ken, won't they think it's weird, like, that I'm here because I'm basically nobody? And Ken says, no, like, you lost your daughter, but he still thinks they're walking into a trap. Go back over to Carter. Carter's still driving. They're on their way back to Naples again, and he doesn't want to answer any questions from Tommy or Sophie. And he says, like, my boss just wants to tell you himself. So they get to this, like, compound, and it's called, like, Amor or something, like, love something, like something weird. And Sophie, like, basically puts, like, she sees, like, go through this gate, she sees all these agents, she's like, you're CIA. And she's like, you don't look like a spy. He's like, yeah, that's the point. So she tells Tommy, like, just do whatever they say. And they get taken inside, like, basically this hotel on this compound. And his boss comes out, and that's Hodges. Bill Hodges is his name. And he introduces himself. And so Hodges asks Sophie about her dad. And she's like, I don't have a father. And he says, well, basically, she was like, so basically what we find out is that Sophie's real name is not Sophie Grant. It's Sophia Grantano. So Ray is her dad, which we kind of already put that together, but like the names were different. So she changed her name. And not only did she do that, she could actually get fired from her job because when you work in government, you have to disclose your background. And her dad works for the mob. And whether or not he's in jail, they do know that. So she basically did not put him on her information. So she knows that she could get fired for not disclosing that information. And Hodges just basically starts talking about her dad. He's like, Raymond Enrico Grantano was born June 4th, 1950 in Kansas City, Missouri. And after high school, he was drafted. He went to Vietnam and he served 2 years at Okinawa. He mentions that Sophie's mom is deceased. And she's like, what does this family history have to do with this? And so basically Hodges is like, he wants to know, or he asks Sophie, what does she know about her dad's time with the police? And she says, not much. And she knows like basically he got fired and that they left Colorado and never looked back. And she remembers a bunch of headlines basically about her dad. Like they said, Kansas City cop, passed confidential information to mafia brother. Another headline had said disgraced detective escapes jail time. And another one said mafia war claims 3 and at nightclub shootout. So Hodges asked her, like, were you recruited by the EPA right out of grad school at Berkeley? And she's like, no, I basically forced them to hire me. She went to their office in Denver and, like, would not leave without a job, basically. And she admits, like, really the reason that she joined the EPA was, like, she wanted to prove that she could be a better cop than her dad. And she tells him, like, I've only seen him one time in the last, did she say 30 years, really? I just don't imagine her being that old.
Yeah, same.
I get like maybe she's in her 30s, not like she's 50.
Right.
But whatever. So she says it's been 30 years since she saw her dad, and he was standing in the back of her grad school graduation. I mean, that would literally make her like 50 something.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah, no, I envisioned her being like in her 30s.
Yeah, I did not envision until I just read this again. Even though I wrote it down, like I glanced over. I was just taking notes. I wasn't reading. So Hodges tells her that her father is actually on his way here with Ken to pick up the bodies of Chris and Madeline. And he tells her that there's a base in Missouri by the Ozarks. We love Ozark. Anyways. And basically what the Kansas City mob has been doing is that there's a base in Missouri and they test weapons, and like 25% of those weapons typically fail. So somehow or the other, like Ken and like the Nietzsche's, they get those weapons and they intercept them and they send them down to New Orleans. And then from New Orleans, they send them to Italy to Luca and his mob. So they are like, shipping weapons. And he says that her dad and Ken and them are not just here for the bodies. They're having a meeting with Luca. So Sophie asks him, like, do you want me to bug my dad? And he says that if you don't, I'm going to call your boss and tell him about your real dad. And so she's like, oh, you guys are desperate. Oh, you need me. So she asks if they had played hardball with Chris and Madeline to get them to switch. And Hodges says, no, actually, they came to us. We switch back over to El Domingo, and he is talking to DeSalvo again, and he's at a cemetery. He's like stretching, and he pulls out Chris's head from a backpack and buries it. Very strange. Back to Sophie. She is remembering the day her mom died, and like, actually, I don't know if this is the day her mom died or the day that they left. But this is basically like the one time she's ever seen her dad cry. And so what we learn is her mom basically, after all the stuff went down with her dad being like fired and let go off the police force, her mom kicked her dad out and took her from Kansas City and moved her and Sophie to Colorado. And a week after her mom died, she scored a perfect score on her ACT in her senior year. And that's basically like her drive and everything about how she went to college. So she is sitting in that hotel still on the compound, and she gets a call from the EPA asking like, Special Agent Grant, why are you in Naples? And she's like, oh, like, I forgot I have a tracker in my phone. Like, what do you mean you forgot? Like, you're a government agent. What do you mean you forgot you had a tracker in your phone? So she lies and she's like, oh, I had to like come down here and just do something. But her boss is like, you know what? That's actually good. Also, her boss hates her. But her boss is like, that's good because when they had that shootout on the mountain, I keep saying mountain, but it's a volcano, but whatever. When they had that shootout, a lot of her like team got killed, so they had to send in like some new Marines to protect her basically, and they're not going to be there till tomorrow. So he's like, actually, it'd probably be best if you just spend the night down there. So that's good. So she texts Tommy and she's like, hey, like, because he's in another room, she's like, hey, I need to like tell you something. She basically goes and tells Tommy everything about her family, and she's like, do you hate me? He's like, no. So she asks Tommy, like, do you know why I got demoted? And he says, like, you know, the word is that you stole a plane and flew to Africa. Like, what? So she says yes. And she's like, basically, because it happened internationally, the files for whatever happened were sealed. But basically what happened was she was in Boston working, and she got a case about a 2-year-old boy who died. He was from Sudan, and he died of lead poisoning in his rental apartment. And they took the landlord to court. And basically, the landlord was arguing that the family had stayed in like 2 different refugee camps before making it to Boston. And so they couldn't prove that he hadn't got lead poisoning at those other camps. So she like stole a plane and went to these countries and these camps to get samples for like the lead poisoning. And she like lied on this paperwork and all kinds of stuff. So she takes the plane and she finds it out. And she didn't tell her boss, and that's why he hates her now. So he's like holding a grudge. So, but she does come back, and the samples do show that the lead poisoning happened in Boston. So she does all of that only for the landlord to only get 18 months. Like, oh my gosh. It was, yeah. So that's why she was demoted for a while. So we go back to Carter. He's talking to his boss, Hodges, about whether or not Sophie will, like, agree to help them. And she comes up and she says, like, I agree on one condition. She wants her record fixed so that her dad never existed when she gets back. We switch back over to Il Ramingo. He is in the catacombs instead of Italy, which I'm not going in catacombs.
Nope.
I booked, as a matter of fact, when we get to Rome, I booked us a tour of like the Colosseum and like the Vatican. And there was something about catacombs. I was like, nope, I'm not going underground. I'm not going down there. Have you ever seen As Above, So Below?
Yes.
I've never watched it, but I've listened. I know exactly what happens. Like I listened to the podcast about it, and I'm like, I would never be down there.
No, thank you.
I'm like,
I mean,
no.
I think the
I would have
idea of seeing it
from a distance
is cool.
I would like look down there,
but I don't want to go in there.
I have palpitations thinking about that. I don't want to be down there.
Mm-mm.
I'm like I know this is such a sidebar, but like when I see people going like the pyramids, I'm like, why are you in there? We are not supposed to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do people have such a fascination with getting in these tiny spaces that were never meant for us to be inside of? Mm-hmm. These are burial grounds.
Right.
Ooh.
Not only is it just the thought of it scary, but it's disrespectful.
Yes. I'm like, I don't want any bad juju. Like, I'm good. I'm so good. So, yeah. I read Catacombs and I was like, But I guess he's a murderer, so it doesn't matter. Like, he don't care. So, he's in these catacombs and he's basically, somehow, he has bugged. He's, like, underneath Carter and them at their compound. So, he's listening into this whole conversation with Hodges. And basically, Hodges and Carter also have some informant that works for Luca named Pico. I didn't know that. Pico. So we go back to Sophie and Tommy, and they are like practicing shooting. So they're doing like a whole bunch of shooting, and then they practice like hand-to-hand combat, and they hear gunshots. So Tommy's like, stay here, and he pokes his head out, and then she hears like 2 clicks, and then all of a sudden Tommy like staggers back in, grabbing his chest. He's white in the face, and like there's red spots expanding on his shirt, and he just collapses. And I'm like, what the hell? So a tall man in a dark cloak comes into the room and places a red cornicello in front of her, and it says Memento Mori. And he leaves the room, and then she feels for a pulse on Tommy, and he's dead. And then Carter busts into the room, and I'm like, dang it, I liked him. So we go back over to El Ramingo, and he basically says he wasted a little bit of time because he kind of like stopped and he said something to Sophie, so that like gave Carter a little bit of time to catch up on him, but they don't get him. And somehow, in addition to doing all this, while he killed Tommy, he has Pico strapped to his back. How is that possible? He's a grown man strapped to his back.
And you know what that's giving me? That one SpongeBob episode where that purple guy has Patrick strapped. Like that's SpongeBob. All I am envisioning.
Gosh. No, this is Patrick. I love SpongeBob. So, yeah, he did all of this. He tranquilized Pico, had him strapped to his back like a baby carrier, and then he killed Tommy and other people and left. Like, this man is unreal. And then he, like, goes out. He has, like, a stolen ambulance, and he puts him on a gurney and drives off. Like, it's crazy what this man is pulling off. So we go back to Sophie, and her boss says, that he thought he'd be happier when he took her badge. But basically he tells her Tommy is only the third EPA agent to ever die in the line of duty. And he tells her she's suspended pending a formal investigation indefinitely. And she's supposed to be leaving on a flight tomorrow. And she's like, I'm not going whether or not I have a job. I'm staying here. He's like, fine. Like, he doesn't care. So she's still at the hotel and she goes to find Hodges and Carter. And they're watching the cameras from the catacombs and they can see him. And they says it's Il Ramingo. And Il Ramingo basically means Midnight Rambler. So that M word that we didn't know how to pronounce in the blurb, it's like something with an M, Ramingo, and that means the Midnight Rambler. So she said, she tells him, like, I'll still plant the bug on my dad if you need me to. And Hodges like, that's great because he lands in 2 hours. And they tell her, like, we have a gift for you. And they bring out Maria, which is the little orphan girl. So Carter and Sophie are drinking coffee as they're kind of waiting for her to go meet her dad. And Carter has briefed her on everything that they know about the Rambler. She called Tommy's mother to let him know that he had died. And this is where we learn a little bit more. So memento mori means remember that you die. And it's basically a reminder that power and fame are only temporary and that we're all mortal in the end. We learned that no one has any pictures of the Rambler. So it's weird that he let himself be seen on camera in the catacombs, like it was purposeful. And we also learned that the name Midnight Rambler comes from a Rolling Stone song that they wrote in Italy in 1969. It's also a song that's written about a mass murderer, the Boston Strangler. So we learned that the Midnight Rambler is like an expert at disguising, infiltration. He's lethal with blades, which is his preferred method of killing. Like he's proficient in hand-to-hand combat, demolition. Like he is the ultimate killer. And on top of that, he never leaves any DNA, like not a single trace of himself. So Carter says like they haven't told Captain Fattore that they had Pico in the first place because it like violates a contract with her. And Sophie's like, yeah, she seems pretty like badass, so I get it. And Carter says that, yeah, the system hates her and they've tried to take her out twice now. And then he shows a picture of her uncle, David, and we see that Ray is here. And Ray is sitting on a bench, he's crying, and she goes to like walk up to him, but then a young man comes up to this old couple that's by Ray and like tries to rob them. So like her dad gets up and like basically attacks the mugger. So she speaks out to him and he recognizes her voice. So they go to a cafe and she like Ray asks why is she there with the EPA? And she says, I'm actually here about Madeline. So she says, like, you know, you can talk to the CIA and get protection. And he's like, no, I can't, you know, I mean, I'm in the mob, all those things. And Ray basically, like, we learned that Ray got caught up with the mafia because he was trying to help out his brother David. So, basically, he stole information or evidence from work to help David out because he had, like, a hitman out to get him. And that's what got him fired. So Sophie tells him that she understands why he did it, but asks if he ever even thought about her or her mom. And she wears this locket that's from her mom and she takes it and gives it to him. And she said that always told herself that she would give it back to him if she ever saw him again. And she just gives it to him. And as she's trying to leave, he stops her and he says that he's really proud of her. So she goes out to Hodges and Carter and she's like, how did I do? And they're basically like one of those vans with like all the computers. Like we know what that looks like. And they're basically like, good job. So we go over to the Rambler and he has Pico hanging from a tree above like the bubbling toxic waste. And he calls Luca, and Pico's like begging, like saying, I didn't tell them anything. And Luca says like he wants to see him drop. So the Rambler like cuts the cord and Pico falls in like waist deep to this toxic waste. And the Rambler tells him like, you're lucky he didn't feed you to one of his pigs because Luca has these vicious pigs. So Pico's skin starts to like slough off in clumps and he's like, please kill me. And so Luca says, oblige him. So the Rambler punches through his head with a sword. Very Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Lucas starts chastising the Rambler about how he diverted from the plan with the yacht. And the Rambler is like, I have a code and I'm not going to kill women, basically. And so Lucas says that, I hear you have a plan for the, like, what's going on with the mountain with Sophie. And the Rambler says he does, but he has to test it out first. And so Luca tells him, like, okay, well, I want her killed once the sensors are removed on the mountain, and I don't care about your code. So then, like, the Rambler goes to where the sensors were placed, and he, like, basically drops, like, a mini bomb in it and blows the sensor up. So Sophie is with Maria and is telling her basically how her mom got cancer just like Maria's mom did. And they kind of have like a bonding moment over losing their moms. Hodges is talking to Captain Fattore about their mission, like planning on bugging Ray and all of that. And she doesn't know about the bug being planted because they don't trust her team. So they don't tell her that information, but they do tell her a little bit about what they're planning to do. And so then they hear like Ray and all of them, they're like on their way to meet Luca, and they basically say they don't want Luca to know that they're carrying weapons, so like no one move funny when they get in there. And they're like, Jimmy, don't be trigger happy. And so they tell Ray to like stay in the back, keep your eyes open, and Ken and David will do all the talking. And they have BTO with them, and that's like the big guy. He's their exit strategy. So Hodges asks, like, how did you even plant the bug on him? And she tells him like she put it in the locket. And Carter is like, what did you say? And he like jumps up and grabs that red cornicello and smashes it, and there's a freaking bug inside it. So every time that he was putting those cornicellos on them, that's how he's always been able to hear them. So we go over to Ray, and Ray is like, I'm going to die today. He's like, but not like my obese brother. Because like Ray is like really fit, and David is like a big fat slob. So Ray is like, my end is going to be painful, gruesome, bullet-riddled death by Luca. And he knows that his daughter's death had something to do, like, or had to do with something bigger. And he wants to know why, and he believes that the Nietzsches are compromised. So Ray tells David he feels like they're the cows going to slaughter. And Ken's like, you just need to calm down. There's nothing to worry about. Ken says, Luca is a businessman, and we're his best supplier. And Ray's like, yeah, that would be a perfect way to send a message by killing, like, your best supplier, basically. It keeps the herd in line. So Ken tells Jimmy, if Luca shoots me in the face, then take a deep breath and count to 5, and then you return fire. So they arrive at Luca's like compound, and a woman comes out to get them and says they can all come in except BTO. But Ken's like, no, he needs to come too. So she lets him, and she's like, no guns. So they all like fakely disarm, even though they do still have weapons on them. And they sit at this table across from Luca. So Jimmy like jumps up, and he's like, something bit me. And there's a big hairless pig, like a Pumbaa, basically. It's a warthog. A Pumbaa comes out, and Ray tells David that Luca's been feeding it human fingers. Like, that's why it's nibbling on your hand. Gross.
Yep.
Luca says, and toes. Thanks to the Nigerian. So basically he killed a bunch of like Nigerian opposition and fed them to his pigs. And they look over, and the pigs are literally fighting over like a nub of a finger or something. It's gross. This is inhumane. Ken says, you said that you knew who killed my son. And Ray says, and my daughter. And Luca says, I do. He says, it was me. I killed them. And Ken's like, give me a reason I shouldn't tear your head off. And Luca says, I have many reasons. And Luca, I said, this is where I was like, Luca reminds me from, have you ever seen Bad Boys 2? Mm-hmm. And Luca gives me like Hector vibes, like the guy in like Colombia. I was like, this is what he was reminding of. Like, I know he's Italian and not Colombian, but he like was giving me Hector vibes. But Luca like snaps his fingers, and like a dozen armed men walk in with weapons like pointed at all the guys. And he tells Ken like, it'd be a shame for you to lose both of your sons. And he asks like, did you know your son was a traitor, basically? And Ken's like, there's no way. But Luca basically pulls out the video that was recorded of Chris and Madeline on the yacht. And David tells Ken, like, we need to go. And Luca's like, no, you're not going anywhere. You're going to sit here and watch this video because he's like, I'm not convinced that Chris was acting alone and you guys aren't involved. So they watch the video of Chris and Madeline with Carter. And Luca says, this American is CIA and he's hunting me. And Ken is like, I don't believe it. So he's like, Luca, did you meet with Chris? And he's like, yeah. And he was making me suspicious. And he was asking about an earthquake in 1980. And basically there was a bomb that caused it. And he's looking for like something similar. So Jimmy hops up and he's like, I'm not buying this, like blah, 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 blah. And Ken says, this was Madeline. Madeline made Chris weak. And Ray is like, what'd you say? So they square off a little bit, and David's like, let's calm down, guys. It's not the time. But then Ken calls Madeline a whore and tells Ray to go. He's like, go F yourself and your daughter. So Ray punches him right in the head. And Ken's like, you're dead. You're dead. So Luca's like, gentlemen, please, this is a business meeting. And Ray like starts yelling at David about how this is all his fault and now my daughter's dead. And then Luca starts playing another video and shows him Madeline, and she's alive, which I knew because I was like, where's her body at? Like, where's no body, no dead body. Like, she's not dead. If I don't see a body, they're not dead. I've watched enough TV. We go to Sophie and she's like, we have to get them out now because they just found the bugs. And they're like, okay, well, we don't think the Rambler has tipped them off because there's not been any calls made to the Luca compound. But Hodges is like, I got a plan. And they hear the part about Madeline being alive. And Sophie's like, no thanks to you. And Carter says, don't put your guilt on me. Like, about Tommy, like Tommy chose to be here, all these things, like basically grow up and own it. And he's like, Madeline came to us too. Like, she knew what she signed up for. And so Hodges is like, shut up. I'm going to talk to Fattore. And basically they hear someone say, like, just arrest everyone. We go back to Ray and he's like, oh my God, she's alive. Did you hear that? And Jimmy says, that's great. And he like jerks his hand again because the pig is like by him. And Ken is like, why would the Rambler leave her alive? I thought he was an unstoppable killing machine. And Luca says, well, he was supposed to kill her, but he failed an order. And until recently, he goes, didn't we have a good business deal going? And Ken's like, well, yeah, we did. And so Luca says, at first, I felt betrayed and disrespected. And he's like, typically I would just lure you here and kill you and feed you to my pigs. But he points to Mount Vesuvius and he says, the same Americans that turned Chris are also up there shutting down our work. And Ken says like, okay, get to the point. And Luca's like, you used to ship your waste out, but now I'm asking you to take waste in because I have more than I can handle. So Ken's like, so you don't want to do weapons anymore? And Luca says, no, I want to do a whole new business. And Ken says, well, new businesses cost money. And he's like, we're a small crew. So Luca's like, well, how does $3 million sound? Well, that sounds pretty damn good to me. Luca says there's just one more thing, the Rambler. He will bring Madeline to Naples tomorrow, and in exchange for Luca's trust, Ken, I want you to put a bullet in her head. Deal? So Ray is like, he's like, oh, my daughter's alive. Like, he's not processing. And then he's like, I was happy for 1 minute. And then I heard that. And so he like jumps up and he's going to like go off. But then Jimmy like starts yelling. He's like, I can't take it anymore. So he pulls his gun out and he points it at the pig. So they're all like, Jimmy, like, put your gun down. You're not supposed to have a gun. Oh my God, put your gun down. And he's like, the pig keeps licking and nibbling my fingers and I can't take it anymore. And the pig darts forward and chomps on his hand and like shakes it. It's like squirting blood everywhere. Like, it makes Jimmy drop his gun and he like tries to punch the pig, but that makes it bite harder on his hand. And a gunshot goes off and the pig like slumps over and Ken says, deal. So Ken shot the pig. We go over to the Rambler and he basically has been sleeping outside of Madeline's cell. And so he makes her breakfast and brings it to her. And she like is like kind of suspect, but she's like, forget it, I'm hungry. But he had drugged it. And so she passes out and then he goes over and washes her hair. And then he like puts a tub of like, he pulls out a tub of white hair dye. We go back to David and he is David and Ray and them. And David is telling Ray like, get in the car and we'll figure this out. So Jimmy is like holding his hand in a towel and saying like, it hurts. And Ken's like, you're fine. We're going to put something on it. Like, you'll be good. Ray's phone buzzes and it says help is on the way. And it's from a blocked number. And Ken's like, who are you texting? He's like, my wife. And Ken's like, oh, okay. Like, Ken's all happy and stuff because he gets to kill Madeline and he got a new deal and all this stuff. So he snatches Ray's phone and says like, who are you talking to? And then Ken notices the locket and the locket has come open so they can see the freaking chip. So Ken pulls a gun on Ray, but the police pull up and Captain Fattore steps out and says, you're not from around here, are you? We go back to Sophie and she's on one side of a one-way mirror and on the other side is Ken, Jimmy, and her Uncle David. So Carter's in there talking to them and asks Jimmy if he wants a doctor and Ken says, no, I want a lawyer. And David is like, what do you guys want? And Carter says, easy, I want you guys to go back tomorrow and meet with Luca. And once Madeline appears, we plan on taking Luca down. So Ken's like, there's not in a million years. And Carter says, well, no one's going to come to help you here. There's no lawyers. Like, basically, you're overseas and you're terrorists. Like, no one's coming to help you. So Hodges comes in to talk to Sophie and basically says, like, you're not supposed to be here. And she's like, I got it. Like, I was never here. So her dad is out in the hallway and he and Hodges go into the room with the men together, which is weird. And they showed them footage of like the guys doing like different crimes back in the state. And Ken is like, nah, that's not me. That's not me. So Jimmy's like, can I have some water and like an aspirin? And Carter's like, yeah, like when we're done. So David's like, what is this? Good cop, bad cop? And Carter says, we're not cops. Carter says, do you know who shot this footage? And Ken assumes that it was like Chris. And then Ray says, no, it was me. He's been undercover this whole time. Ray's been working with them the whole time. And Sophie's like, oh my gosh, I wonder how long. And so Ray says, like, basically he made a dumb choice by saving his brother's life all those years ago. And it cost him everything. And he wasn't going to lose another daughter. So some different agents come in and they have like hoods on. And the guys are like, what's up with the hoods? And basically Carter says, like, they don't want to be on camera for what they're about to do. And Jimmy's like, Dad, like, what's going on? And Hodges says, this next part is my favorite. And so, like, they grab Jimmy's, like, bandaged hand and they take the bandages off and he's, like, screaming. And they had brought in a cart and it had, like, a blanket over it. And they take the blanket off and there's, like, a jar full of these crab beetles, which are, like, they're, like, piranha beetles, basically. And they eat anything. And so David's like, you can't torture us. We're Americans. And Carter's like, there are no rules when you sell guns to terrorists. So Ken's like, fine. Like, we'll go to the meeting and we'll wear a wire. So Sophie goes out to dinner with Maria and Carter and her dad, and she wanted to basically try to take her dad's mind off Madeline, and Ray gives her the necklace back, and she says that, like, basically, like, you played me. Like, I thought I was bugging you this whole time. You've been, like, working with them. And so she, like, asked them, like, basically we learned, like, the plan is after this is all done, like, Ray's gonna flip and, like, work for Carter and them. And so she asked, like, how long has he been helping them? And he says, basically, when Chris proposed to Madeline, and Madeline said yes. He says, like, please let me explain, because she's pissed, and she tries to leave, and she's like, you got 5 minutes. So he tells her, like, I was young when my parents were killed, and then I went to Vietnam, and then I became a cop, and I got promoted to detective. David, on the other hand, like, fell into crooks, and by the time he was 19, he was a member of the Nietzsche business, and back then, Ken's dad was the boss. So basically, Ken's dad got caught bragging to an FBI, like, on an FBI wire about some of their dealings, and he got arrested. And, like, by the time he made bail, that same day, someone had killed Ken's dad, and all the other crime families were, like, out to get the Nietzsche, like, all the members. So David and Ken were kind of, like, in hiding. And David turned to Ray for a favor. So Ray broke into the evidence, and he basically listened to a tape and found out that there were some New York hitmen that were planning to kill David. So he told David about it, and he thought that they were going to run. But instead of running, they ambushed the guys and killed everybody. And he says, like, the worst thing about losing them, he says the worst thing about all this was losing you and your mom. And Sophie says, like, you pushed us away. And then he pulls out a recorder, and it's a recording of David saying, basically, to Ray, like, they know about you and your wife and Sophia. You need to get them out of town for good. So basically, he pushed them away so that they wouldn't get killed. So everything was for a reason. And he begs her that no matter what, tomorrow she'll protect Madeline. We go to BTO, which is, like, the big guy that the Nietzsche's brought with them, and he's nervous. He's like, I don't think we're going to survive going back to a meeting with Luca. And he's like, as soon as I get home, I am quitting them. Like, I'm getting a new job. And, like, we learned he used to be, like, regular army, and then he was, like, special ops. And he had, like, met up with a kid. He basically had a whole bunch of, like, burner phones bought, and then he goes back to this cafe with, like, the rest of the guys, and they're eating pizza, and Jimmy's, like, struggling because Ken's like, you're supposed to eat pizza with a knife and fork over here, and Jimmy, like, obviously only has one hand. So he's struggling. We go over to Madeline, and she basically has, like, thinking back. So Madeline has had 2 stillborns, and that's because of toxic waste back in Kansas City. So basically, her babies had blue baby syndrome, and that made Chris tell her about the family business. So she knew Chris was in, like, this mafia or whatever, but she didn't know what they did. And he had always told her he was not going to tell her because he didn't want to implicate her. But when they couldn't get pregnant and they kept losing the babies they did, like, he just, like, basically broke down crying one night and told her everything. And so basically what they do is, like, the companies that don't want to follow the waste laws, because it costs people money to, like, properly dispose of their waste. They contact the Nietzsche's, they get rid of their pollution, and they ship it down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, and then they ship it to Italy. And the Italian mob dumps it on Mount Vesuvius, which is what made Chris feel so bad, because when he realized that their baby, like, kept dying, he was like, what's happening to all these people that live on Mount Vesuvius in these towns where we're dumping all this waste? So the next day, Madeline went to her dad after he told her that, and they were like, we want a way out. And then she thinks like the last thing she remembers is being abducted while Chris was sleeping that night before the yacht was blown up. So she wakes up and her captor is singing, and her hand and feet are bound, but her mouth isn't gagged, and she doesn't scream because she was like, I think this is a test, so I'm not going to scream. And I was like, smart girl. So he gives her water, and then he gives her a fork and knife, but then he like makes a like signal with his hands, like, if you try to kill me with these utensils, I'm going to kill you. And he tells her to eat. And she realizes that she's not in her cell anymore. They're at like some like small little house. It's very clean. And he's like sawing like shotguns. And she's like, where is Chris? And she says like, I'm going to be sick. So he takes her to the bathroom to throw up. And so she looks in the mirror and she sees that he like dyed a streak of blonde like down the middle of her head. I'm not understanding that. And she's like, why would he do that? And he left her in the bathroom and there's like an open window. So she like jumps out of it and she realizes they're like high up on a mountain. There's cliffs, and he like just calmly walks up behind her because he knew she was going to do that. And she asks if he's going to kill her, and she says no. He says no, there's a code. So she asks like, what's his name? And he tells her like the Rambler in Italian. And she asks where are they? And he says like whatever the name of his home is. And she's like, I want to go home. And he tells her there's a trade set for the morning. So she asks if Chris will be there. And he says no. And he tells her like, he's buried right over there. Do you want to see him? We go to Hodges, and he's basically going over the code word with Ray, which is Esperanza. And he basically tells him like, as soon as they bring Madeline out, you need to say it. So Jimmy is like, I can't wait because there's a 100% chance that Luca's going to kill all of us. And they're like, what? But Jimmy's drugged up on Oxy for his hand because they had a medic come clean him up. So he's just like loopy. So Ken tells Ray, like, when this is all over, you better find an igloo at the North Pole because I'm coming for you. And Ray's like, I'm not hiding from you. I'm going right back home. I'm going to the bar I'm always at. Like, he's like, I don't care about you. So Carter asks, where's BTO? Because he kind of gave them the slip. And Ken says, he says he's on the way to F your mother. I was like, okay, Ken. So David goes over to Sophie and he's like, I haven't seen you since you were 7. I just wanted to say, and she's like, if you're going to tell me you're sorry, like for ruining my life, screw you. Which like, good. Like, don't freaking talk to me. Don't talk to me. And Ray tells her that he loves her and she tosses him the locket and says, I'm going to need that back. Basically like, don't die. So Ray's all wired up and they're at the compound waiting, and they go in to meet with Luca. And Luca asks, do they know how much it costs to raise a pig like the one that Ken killed? And Ken says no, but he assumes it's going to cost just about as much to fix Jimmy's hand. And they're like in a cold storage unit this time. They're not at his house, and it's freezing in there. So there's like a loud humming from the refrigeration, and Luca's like, oh, sorry, but this helps with the surveillance so they can't hear us. Meanwhile, a tech tells Sophie like, yeah, we can still hear them and we can see them. So Sophie starts to put on Kevlar because she's like, okay, I'm going to get ready to go in there. And Hodges like, no, absolutely not. You're not going in there. And also like, no, you're not going. What are you going to do? Why would you go in there? So Luca is telling the guys like, let's get this show started. And he hands over the money to Ken. And Ray's like begging, like, please don't kill Madeline. Like, what can I do for you? And Luca says, you can watch. Ouch. So a man walks in to stand by Luca, and we are introduced to the Rambler again. And he says, like, you have a beautiful girl. And he says, I will keep her safe. And he keeps calling Madeline Juliana. And Ray is like, I don't understand. And Luca's like, where is the girl? And the Rambler says something in Italian, and then he grabs Luca by the back of his head, like exposes his throat and freaking slices his throat, drenching Ken and Jimmy in Luca's blood. So of course he runs, he like kicks a guy in the chest on his way out, and another guy like tries to swipe at him, and he slices his freaking head off. And then everyone starts shooting at each other. So like only Jimmy pulls out his gun. He's the only one that tries to do anything, and everyone starts attacking the Americans. So Ray is like hiding. He can't see David, can't see Ken, but BTO is like off to the side, and he slides him a pistol because the gun he has is out of bullets. And so Ray is just like, Esperanza! And BTO is like, who the fuck are you talking to? So Sophie grabs a rifle and she's like, I'm going in there. And she's like, my dad's in there. And they're like, okay, but we want to catch the Rambler. And Hodges tells another agent to go because she's like, okay, but like, my dad is in there and you've already lost like Chris. So Ray is out of bullets again, and a man tries to stab BTO. So Ray jumps on his back and they're able to get him off. So Sophie goes in there and she's like, everyone drop your weapons. But then there's like another wave of like the Camorra that come in shooting again. And so she tries to grab the case of money and she gives it to her father and tells him like to go with the agent, and they all are able to get out. Meanwhile, David, Ken, and Jimmy had hid in a walk-in freezer. And these morons didn't check to see if there was a release button. So they are stuck in the freezer and they're freezing. And Ken is like, he remembers the wire, so he snatches all that off and tells them to do the same. And David's like, don't we need the CIA to get us out of here? Like, how are we going to get home? And he's like, Ken's like, we're on our own now. So they hear like another round of fire and then silence, and they can tell that someone's like right outside the door. So everybody's like, shut up. But Jimmy notices the carcass of the pig that bit his hand, and he's like freaking out. So the door opens, and it's basically, her name is Chiari, something like that. Chiari, something like that. She is like basically Luca's like second in command or whatever. And so she comes in and she's like, is it a good time to talk? So Carter is driving behind the Rambler, so they're following him, and they follow him into a canyon, and somehow he gets ahead of them. They get to the car, and he's freaking gone. Like, they cannot catch this dude. Back to Ken and Jimmy and David. They are meeting with Chiari, whatever her name is. And she tells them, like, you know, the Rambler is the best, but he is a little damaged, and, like, he has a code because it's assumed that he lost, like, his love or whatever, and it made him crazy. So they asked, like, what was that he said before he killed Luca? And he said, no women, no children, his code. Because Luca was like, I don't care about your code, so he killed him. And she says that they also know that the Rambler was angry about having to kill Madeline, or like being wanted to kill her. And so she says that basically she needs to establish herself now because people will find out about Luca's death. And then she kills the other pig and says everyone hated those pigs, and the last time it nibbled on my hand, and tells them that they can help by agreeing to the same deal that they had made with Luca. So they ask, like, are you not suspicious of us, like, with everything that's happening? And she's like, okay, well, are you working with the CIA? And they're like, no. And she says, Jimmy, like, you don't look good, and tells him that she'll have his hand looked at. She tells them that basically she has a boat ready to sail them back to the United States undetected, and that they'll cruise under the flag of Taiwan. And Ken's like, what's the catch? And she says that she needs them to shepherd something during the trip. And a man comes in and cuts off Luca's thumb. And then there's like a phone tub. I don't know if it was like digital print or whatever, but like they're real weird with fingers around here. We go back to Hodges, and he's basically asking Carter to come in his office for a drink, and he's like, I can't wait. And he gives Carter this black folder and says not even the deputy director knows about what he's going to tell him. So the first page says top secret, and it has a list of signatures of everyone who's ever read this folder, and there's only 11 names, 3 of which are former presidents. And Hodges asks if he knows how Hodges got promoted to chief. And Carter says, like, yeah, like, you got a gang of Russians and stopped them at, like, the Italian border, and there was a bomb. And Hodges says that's true, but he actually basically tells him, like, there were 2 bombs and I missed one and it got smuggled out. So then he shows him paperwork saying that they're getting rid of the monitoring stations and everything on the mountain. Well, basically they're defunding it. They're not getting rid of it. So basically Hodges has been doing all this work because he's about to retire and he wants to make up for his mistake with losing that bomb all those years ago. And what we find out is... well, no, I won't tell you that. We find out later. And so we learned that he basically had the EPA and Sophie brought over here to kind of like stir the pot with the Russians and the Italians to see if they would move the bomb, because he's pretty sure that they have it on Mount Vesuvius. And Hodges knows that the Russians are in on everything that's going on with the Italians, and basically says if they find the Rambler, they'll find the bomb. So Sophie goes to talk to her dad, and he tells her he tried to call his wife and found out that she overdosed on pills, and luckily a neighbor had found her, but she's still stable. And he's like, you have to get Maria out of here. And Maria does not want to go home because she lives in the orphanage, and she starts to call Ray grandfather. And Sophie pulls Ray to the side and says, like, I know what you're trying to do. Like, basically you're trying to put her under her wing and adopt her. And he's like, yeah, you know, like, you would be good to adopt her. And we go back to the Rambler, and he is back on, like, his mountain path, wherever he's at. And he gets a message from DeSalvo asking if he was successful, and he says yes. And there are helicopters out looking for him. So he goes into an old farmhouse where he has a spare gun. And then he catches a ride with the truck and back into town. And once he's there, he, like, holds the man at gunpoint and makes him call the police using his phone, saying he gave a man a ride. And then he stabs a man in the chest. And then he was like, well, I didn't really have to kill him, but I did. Like, what? Then we go to Captain Fattore. So she is tracking the Rambler. They hear a scream from inside an old farmhouse, and it sounds like a woman. So they bust in and they find a woman with a stripe of white hair tied in the middle of the room, which we know is Madeline. And she says, "He told me to tell you memento mori." And something like yanks a rope that was wrapped around her, and the light goes out, and a bunch of like sawed off shotguns start going off all at once. And the Rambler comes out and like cuts off one of the sergeant's heads, like he loves to decapitate somebody, and he says, "Excellent, Juliana. That gave me just enough time," but he looks and Madeline's freaking gone. And Madeline's like running past where Chris is buried, and she's like, "Goodbye, my love." And she basically tells us like when she decided her and Chris were like gonna like flip on his family, they took a tactical training class, which like she hated because they like lived in the woods for like a week. But it basically prepared her for all of this. And so she basically like when like the gun started to go off, she jumped out of a window. And so she's running and hears him calling her name. So she's hiding and she grabbed a gun from one of the police officers that got shot, and she just starts like shooting at him, and she can tell that he gets hit. But this girl trips and falls and cracks her freaking head, and she goes unconscious. But when she wakes up, the sun is down more, but there's no sign of the Rambler. She can hear him calling her name, but he obviously doesn't know where she was, and he went the wrong direction. So she makes it all the way down like the mountain to a cafe and asks to borrow a phone. So we go back to Sophie and Ray. They're looking at like historical facts at the compound, and he tells her how proud he is of her, and he asks her about the scholarship that she got that helped her go to grad school. And I can't remember what it's called, but she tells him the name, and he pulls out a card, and he's the scholarship. So basically, he wanted to like he took all the money out of his pension, and he wanted to give it to her, but he couldn't just give it to her because like someone might have been looking for her, and he didn't want them to know that she was his daughter. So he came up with the scholarship and then rewarded her with it. And she starts crying, and then she looks and she has 2 missed calls from Carter and calls him back, and he says it's Madeline. So Madeline was able to shoot the Rambler in the side, and he is like in pain, but he's like, the pain of losing her was worse than the shot. So he's meeting with DeSalvo, and DeSalvo is like, "Can you fight?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm good," or whatever. And DeSalvo says like the police have Madeline, and he's like, "Oh, that's good. Like we can easily get her back from them. Like the police suck." So another helicopter like flies over his house, and he freaking just blows up his house, and it takes the helicopter down. But there's a second helicopter, so he has a rocket launcher and shoots it at the helicopter. Like there are endless weapons. What, this guy is unreal. We go to BTO, and he's telling Hodges like, "I want a gun," and Hodges is like, "I'm not giving you a gun. You're a mafia man." So they're headed back to the beach where like the boat explosion had happened, and they're meeting with Vittoria, and she's upset because like Ray and like BTO are there, and she's like, "Who are these guys?" And she tells them that Madeline is in her custody and offers to take them to her. So Carter's like, "Oh, is she at the police station?" And she's like, "No, because that would be too obvious." So they get to Vittoria's house, and Madeline rushes out to Ray. And we learn that Vittoria actually had a son who died in the Iraq war, because they're like looking at her pictures and everything. And Hodges says like this reunion needs to wait because he has questions for Madeline. And Sophie tries to like give Ray and Madeline a moment, but Ray is like, "Come be with your family." And Madeline's like, "Yeah, Sophia, please." And so they all like have a little embrace, which is sweet. And they ask like, "Did the Rambler do anything to you?" And she's like, "No, he was actually kind and gentle." And she describes his home and how he had killed everyone back up on the mountain. And she tells them that he has knives that come out of his arms. And they say, "How?" And then he appears. And he says like this. And he presses his like a finger to the center of his palm, and these like 12-inch knives like shoot out of his like forearms.
Okay, Wolverine.
Yeah, actually. And while this is all happening, Carter is drinking coffee with Vittoria. So they're talking about her home and how beautiful it is. And Hodges is with her. And Hodges sees a framed autograph from the Rolling Stones. And she said, "Yeah, they recorded a song next door." And we know that the only song that they recorded in Italy was the Midnight Rambler. And Carter's like, "Dun, dun, dun." And they turn to her, and she has a freaking gun on them. And Carter says, "He's not dead, is he?" And she says, "Nere," or she says, "The Nere I knew was," and I'm like, it's her damn son. The Rambler is her freaking son. And that's why he always spares her life. It's her son. So Hodges says, you've been covering his tracks. And Hodges says, so basically, like, she kind of, like, got promoted because she supposedly caught a serial killer. And all the victims had the same, like, 2 knife wounds. And they thought it was, like, some type of weapon. But really, it was her son, Enrico, knife hands. So, because he has these knives. And he, like, or whatever. So she tells Hodges that he's given her an unimaginable gift. And he says, you mean Little Bear, which is what they refer to as the bomb on Mount Vesuvius. And she says yes. So Fattori forces them outside with Ray, Sophie, and Madeline. And we also learned that DeSalvo is his mom. So the whole time he was meeting with DeSalvo, the Rambler, that was his mom. And the Rambler is her freaking son. Like, they're a duo. And so they try to tell her, like, we can help you guys. And she freaking shoots Hodges in the chest. So the Rambler calls Madeline Juliana again and tells her to come. And he takes off his hat and goggles. And he's like hairless. His head's all scarred. And she's like, stop calling me that. And Fattori says, like, after they murdered him, they just left him out there. And he was a good soldier who followed orders. So Carter dives for her gun, but she shoots faster than him and, like, hits him in the thigh. And she turns to point the gun at Ray, and the Rambler says, Juliana, I will kill your father. And Ray says, you're not taking her, but the Rambler squeezes the gun, and BTO actually jumps out of nowhere and knocks the gun out of his hand. So Fattori shoots at him, but BTO is able to kick her in the chest, and the Rambler, stabs his knife through BTO's arm. So BTO, but is able to, like, overpower him and, like, get him down on his knees. And Sophie realizes that the Rambler is also bleeding at the waist and tries to grab Carter's gun. So Fattori kicks the gun from her, and basically, like, Fattori has a gun on Madeline, and then BTO has, like, the Rambler down. So Fattori is like, tell this man to take his gun off my son, or I'll shoot your daughter. And BTO is like, I shouldn't. But go ahead and run to mommy. So he does. He lets the Rambler go to his mom, and they say, give us Madeline. So they take Madeline with them, and they leave. So Carter and Sophie are talking now that they're gone, and Ray found some keys to a car, and him and Sophie are like, we're going to chase after them. So they're, like, chasing them, like, up the mountain, and they pull up beside them, and the Rambler is, like, leaned out, aimed at their car, but Madeline, like, reaches behind him and, like, starts choking him while he's trying to shoot them. And so he is still able to, like, to shoot them and get away. And, like, their car, like, goes off to the side of the road. And when they are actually able to find the car again, like, it's empty again because they always freaking escape. And there's a man there who says that he saw a man with a bad sunburn and he put a gun to his head and took my van. So the police show up and they tell Ray to drop his weapon. Ray doesn't understand what they're saying because they're speaking Italian. And Sophie's like, they think you're the Rambler. So Fattori had called the police on Ray and Sophie after they stole the van, which is why they showed up. And the Rambler's upset and tells her that she hurt Madeline because Madeline is now unconscious in the back of the van because Fattori, like, backhanded her when she, like, choked him because she's like, she choked you. And, like, the Rambler's like, but I was trying to shoot her dad. Like, I don't know. He's, like, so confused. And Fattori says, are you sure that she needs to see this? And he doesn't respond. So they switch cars again and they go into another house. And Fattori hears the radio and basically she knows, like, that they're onto her because she hears on the radio them telling them that Fattori is an accomplice to the Rambler. So she says, let's go to the Russians. So they go to Andre and Andre welcomes them and he's like, hello, Captain. And she's like, I'm not the captain anymore. So the Russians were the one who found the Rambler, like, almost dead in the desert when he went to Baghdad. And basically, like, they brought him back to life and trained him. So Andre welcomes him into his home and there's a helicopter landing and they, like, pull their guns. He's like, no, my daughter's getting married. That's the decorator. Don't shoot the helicopter. And Andre tells them that Luca's replacement is going to have a word with the Rambler. And Fattori says that you don't even need them. Like, you don't need them anymore. And Andre's like, I do need them because I need stability. Fattori says, you need to get that device off the mountain and out of Italy because the Americans are closing in. And she tells him that the Rambler can drive her to the site, help him get it off the volcano tonight, and then tomorrow that they'll leave on a yacht. And she's like, basically, like, you can do whatever with the bomb. You can sell it or throw it in the ocean. So Andre's like, what are the prices? Like, what's the price? And she says, I want 3 new passports, credit cards, and German national health cards, bank cards linking to a Bermuda account with a total of 2 million euros. And he's like, I don't have enough time for that. And she's like, you're connected, like you can make it happen. And she says, like, we're here tonight, not just for payment, but to repay a debt to you. You saved my son and gave him purpose. So let us help him. Let us help you one last time and help you beat the Americans. We switch over to Chiara, who again is Luca's replacement, and she's basically like kind of have a meeting with everyone at this restaurant. Jimmy is like drugged out of his mind. He's passed out. David wants to sleep, but like now he doesn't trust them either. But she's like their only way out of Italy, so he's like, I don't know. And she asks Ken, like, how does he feel about taking a nuclear weapon back to Kansas City? And David's like, come again? And she says Luca had already had like a lead-lined container ready to transport the bomb. David says, how convenient. And Ken is like, you're starting to sound like your brother. When David is like, I'm all for like the weapons and stuff. But he's like, bringing a nuclear bomb and having it go off in the U.S. was like unthinkable. He's like, I didn't think that Ken would be on board with that either until now. And Ken says, like, it's just a bigger gun. Like, that's what we do. We sell guns. Like, no, a bomb and a gun are not the same. No. But David excuses himself and goes to the bathroom, and he sends like a text message on his burner phone and goes back with the guys. So Vittoria is telling Madeline, like, basically do everything I say and you'll live to see sunrise. And the Rambler tells his mother, like, be nice to her. So they're on their way to get the bomb, and Andre gets a call, and Vittoria's like, who is it? He says that it's my daughter in crisis. There was an issue with the cake decorator, and Madeline is just like, I want to go home. Like, please let me go home. The Rambler says, soon, very soon, you'll get to see what I've been planning for you. So we switch back over to Carter. He was shot in the left thigh, but like it didn't hit his femoral artery, so he's good. And he is now the interim station chief. So he needs to chase down the Rambler, and also he's dealing with the fact that his friend and his boss was killed. And Hodge's body is still like laying out in the courtyard of Vittoria's home, like in a body bag. So Sophie learns about like the history of the Rambler, like being deployed in Baghdad. And they're searching through a bunch of history, and they find the name Juliana, because, again, that's what he keeps calling Madeline. So what they find is a bunch of, like, communication between the Rambler and his mom. And so basically, like, Juliana was a woman that the Rambler had an affair with. They were deeply in love, and she reminded him of his mom. And they're, like, Italian men and their mothers. And basically, she was killed, and she also was pregnant when she was killed. So that's why he is, like his code thing. And so that is when he adopted the name, the Midnight Rambler, and that's when he started, like, saying Memento Mori all the time. They're trying to figure out, like, how is the Rambler and his mom, like, going to get from this desert war zone up to the mountain? And Ray says the Russians. Ray says he just got a text from someone with an Italian number, and it says Maladini. And Sophie starts panicking because that's the town where Maria lives, like, and where her villa is, and it's at the base of Vesuvius. So they try to trace the phone number, and they realize it's a burner phone, and BTO says, oh, like, that's one of the ones I bought. And they realize that there's other burner phones with it, and so they're tracking it, and they realize this must be David's, and that he's right here in Positano too. Or he was when he sent the message. But now they're tracing the numbers, and they're no longer here. They're basically headed towards the town of Maladini. So they realize, like, they won't be able to catch them in time unless they fly. So Sophie pulls up her map of the area, which also shows her, like, all the waste and stuff like that. And she shows, she believes, like, she pretty much knows where the bomb is buried. And she's like, we've got to leave. So they're going to leave in 5 minutes. And we learn that this bomb has a chemical trigger on it, and it may still work even though it's been buried in the ground for years. We switch over to a new person. This is Glenn, and he is an EPA agent, and he's with Maria. And Maria's like, when is Sophie coming? And they're at her house. And he gets a call from Carter, who tells him that the Rambler and the Russians are headed his way. And he's like, should we make a run for it? But they're like, nope, there's no time. So just hunker down. We're airborne and we'll be there soon. Do not engage. So he sits, like, in the house with a rifle waiting. And about 20 minutes later, a bunch of cars show up, and he sees the Rambler and Fattore and all of them. But they don't, like, try to come in the house. They just, like, walk outside. And he's like, I could just shoot him right now. But he's like, I'm going to follow orders to keep Maria safe. So we switch over to the Rambler. He's outside of Sophie's home, and he's talking to his mom and Andre when he hears a voice near the house. But it's actually Chiari, so Luca's replacement, and she is there with Jimmy, Ken, and David, and they all, like, kind of try to hide. And so the Rambler is like asking his mom, like, why is she here? And she calls Andre and tells him like she wants to speak to Fattore, and she says basically like, let's meet in the center square. There's like, they're not far from like the town center, and she's like, I basically want to make a deal where everyone lives and everyone wins. So Fattore goes, and she's like, you cannot have my son's head. And she's like, I don't want his head. I want to hire him. Chiari says, like, basically she wants what Andre has hidden up on the mountain, and she wants to take it to America. And I assume that's why you're here too. And she says, I have one problem. These American buffoons with me. I can't trust them. So she basically wants to have the Rambler and his mom get the bomb and get on the boat with Ken, Jimmy, and David to make sure that they take it back to America. And she's like, once you guys get to America, you can do whatever you want to do. So they call Glenn again, Sophie and Carter, and tell him, like, we're en route, but he doesn't answer this time. So he sends a text back, and he's like, you know, the Rambler's outside, and we're safe now. BTO tells Sophie, like, you know, everything's going to be fine, and he, like, puts his hand on her knee, and she says, I don't think it's the right time to be trying to make a pass. And he's like, I don't think that there will be a better time. And she does say, like, he's, like, handsome, like, he's kind of like a big guy or whatever, but, like, no. And Ray goes, you switch seats with me. And makes BTO switch seats with him and, like, glares at him. And she apologizes to Ray for, like, just being so judgy on him. Carter is actually in a separate helicopter, and he calls over to them. He tells them that the Rambler has stolen 2 of her, like, little, like, tractor machine things that she uses to go up the mountain, and he's already headed up the mountain. So the pilot, like, says, like, we're going to land in the square, and I was like, oh no, because that's where they're having the meeting. So of course, when he tries to land, they start shooting at them, and, like, one of the co-pilots or somebody gets killed in the helicopter. So they, like, pull back up, and he's like, we're going to get out of here. But Sophie's like, no, we have to get Maria. So BTO grabs a rifle and literally kills everybody down on the ground. And so the pilot, like, tries to land again, but they, like, crash. So, like, the pilot's leg gets stuck and Ray gets a cut, but, like, for the most part, they're fine. And they get to the villa and they get Maria. And Ray finds, like, a discarded rifle, and they're like, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to get my daughter. So Sophie tells Maria, like, this is the last night you're going to spend here. And she says, promise. And Sophie says, I promise. And Maria says goodbye to Ray. So David is not excited to ride overseas on a boat with a bomb or with the Rambler. And basically, like, they are with the Russians. So the Russians dig up the bomb. It was hidden under, like, you know, it was buried in dirt, and there was, like, a double cellar door and a concrete frame. And he thinks, like, how tiny it is. It literally looks like a canvas covered barrel with, like, straps like a backpack. He's like, that's a bomb. Like, where are, like, the buttons and, like, the knobs and stuff? And they tell him, like, this is enough to wipe out the city of Manhattan. And basically, it only takes a few minutes for it to, like, activate, and then it will, like, go off or whatever. So Andre says, like, before moving it, he needs to figure out if it still works, because he doesn't want to go through all this and it's a dud. And so basically we find out that this bomb has been buried for 30 years. And so this is the bomb that Hodges didn't catch. And we learned that Andre, the Russian, actually designed and built this bomb. So he knows how to work it. So he, like, connects his phone with a cable, and, like, it's just like the movies. He's like, all systems are a go. Ken tells Madeline, because she's up there also, and says the only way she's getting off this mountain is if they get that bomb. And even then, he might leave her behind. And she tells him that Chris hated you. So he goes to, like, backhand her, and David is like, dude, that's my niece. Like, you're not going to hit her. And he's like, she's been through enough. And Ken tells him, I'm going to put you through enough. And they hear a yell from Chiari, who is looking at the Rambler, who has literally popped out his knife and stabbed Andre under his chin through his skull. Like,
really stabby.
Really, really stabby around here. And Fattore tells them, like, as much as I would like to see the new world, we have other plans for the bomb. And Chiari's like, I'll kill you. And Fattore says, no, you won't. And so then they start shooting. Everybody kind of scatters. So the Rambler grabs Madeline, and they get into, like, the stolen vehicle that was Sophie's. And him, his mom, and Madeline start, like, heading, like, up the mountain or whatever. But not before Fattore gets shot in the stomach, which she deserves. So we go back to Sophie, and she is driving one of the vehicles as well up the mountain, and she just like wants to save her sister and get this bomb and stop the Rambler. And she passes the place where she put a sensor, and she's like, "What the hell? Like, there's a huge like blown out hole now." And she sees another one of her vehicles heading on the mountain, and she realizes that they're not trying to steal the bomb; they want to blow up this volcano. So we go to Carter, and he has Chiari now, and she tells him that the Rambler took the bomb after he killed the Russian, and that him and his mom are like driving in the vehicle. So he gets a call over the radio from Sophie, who says that they can see the Rambler and he's in front of them, and she thinks she knows what he wants to do with the bomb. So we learn there's 10,000 American troops and other families living like on this mountain, and basically he wants vengeance for himself and Juliana and his unborn daughter. So she tells Carter that one of the sensors she placed was like right on top of a fault line, and that's where he blew it up with a bigger hole. So basically she's assuming he wants to drop this bomb down in there, and that'll really like make this whole like volcano erupt and collapse. And if it does, it'll like literally wipe Naples off the face of the earth. So Sophie like is just like thinking how she never could have imagined how drilling a hole in this volcano to help children would have led to like letting the Rambler like blow up this whole place. We switch over to Vittoria, and like she's really in pain. So she got shot through the back, and it came out on her stomach, like near her belly button. She's really bleeding. Her feet are starting to go cold, and she just knows like I'm probably not going to make it off this mountain. But she wants to make sure the plan goes through. And they don't have enough weapons, and Sophie is really gaining on them. So the Rambler turns around and he goes, "Juliana," but Madeline has jumped out again, and his mom is like, "She's gone." And he's like, "She needs to see this." And his mom's like, "No, she doesn't." And she tells him, like, "You need to decide right now. Do you want to finish this with me or not?" And he says, like, he does. So Sophie has, like, gained on them. And what she decides to do is block the hole with her, like, vehicle so that they can't put it in there. And Ray tells Sophie that she's smart, and it appears that, like, the Rambler's going to ram into them. But Ray's like, "No, surely they're not going to hit us with a bomb." But, like, he doesn't know that they're kind of on a suicide mission. So yeah, so they definitely are gonna ram them. So they ram them, and like they start shooting, and then they ram them again. And like Ray gets like knocked out, and then like they get hit so hard that literally Sophie like goes up in the air and like comes down hard. And then we see Vittoria, and she's dead. Like she's like laid out over like the controls. Like that was her last move. So Sophie gets up, and she doesn't see anyone. But she does see the bomb right next to the hole. So she like tries to like get it, but she hears a scuffle behind her, and she turns her pistol, but it's actually just BTO. And she's like, "I almost shot you." And he said, "I've had worse first dates." So she's like, "What are you doing?" And he turns her palm over to show that he got the locket from her father. So she goes over to the bomb, and she finds her dad like stuck under a piece of metal. He's got a pretty bad gash, but it's not life-threatening. And they try to get him up, but the Rambler literally comes out of nowhere and stabs BTO like from his armpit, like through his shoulder. Ouch.
Oh, God.
Yes. So it's like gushing blood everywhere. And she tries to shoot him, but he like slices the gun, and it like slices her hand like between her middle and ring finger, like down to the bone. Oh, that would make me like, oh, I would be unwell. Oh, I would not be able to finish this day out. I would not make it. That would be it for me.
That's like,
yeah,
giving me heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, I cannot. So he does that, but that like she looks and she sees her dad doing or it's getting up, and so her dad gets up and literally like punches the Rambler, and he wasn't expecting it, so it kind of stuns him. So her dad just starts like pummeling him, but he finally is like able to catch himself, and he kind of like spins like all fancy, and he like wraps his legs around Ray, gets him on the ground, and then he stabs him through the chest with one of his knives. So she runs over to her dad, like puts her hands on him and like tries to stop the bleeding. And she's like, "I have to go over here, like just hold pressure and I'll be right back." And so she gets over to the bomb, and the Rambler like points his knife at her and just like tells her to stop. And she says, "Or what? You'll kill a woman? I thought you had a code." So he pulls out a cord that has a key on it. He enters into the bomb. It like chirps 3 times. A keyboard slides out all fancy. He types in the code, and then the keyboard disappears, and a green button lights up, and he pushes the button. So now the bomb is counting down. And he takes the rope that he has like wrapped around himself, and he like basically wraps it around the bomb because he's planning on lowering it down in the hole. But she can tell he's like exhausted and wonder if she is going to be able to shoot him. So as he's preparing to lower the bomb down, she sees Madeline come up behind him, and like basically she takes a big like football sized rock and just slams it on his head. But of course he still gets up, but he's he's got like 10% left in him. He's waning. So he's staggering around, and so Sophie takes the gun, even though she has to use her like non-dominant hand, and she fires 3 shots to hit him in the chest, and that's all he wrote. And he falls back into this like volcanic fissure, doesn't even make a sound. He's gone. So they rush over to their dad, and he's still alive. And he basically is like, get the bomb. So they look, and there's 3 minutes left on this bomb, and they're like, what are we going to do? And Sophie's like, I can't turn it off, because when he turned it on, not only like did he do the keyboard stuff, he broke the key off in it so that it wouldn't be able to turn off. So she reaches for her phone, but she realizes she lost it in the collision, and she's like, great, like this is how I'm going to die. So Madeline's like, well, they said there's some kind of like acid in there, and it's a chemical trigger, and Sophie's like, that's it. So she starts dragging the bomb to the side of the volcano to the cadmium sulfide, which is one of the toxic wastes. And basically, the cadmium sulfide can deactivate whatever the chemical they use to make this bomb. So there's 1 minute and 55 seconds left, and they're like dragging this like bomb because it's heavy, even though it's small. And then Carter shows up and another agent. So they're all like grabbing this bomb, and it's literally down to the last 4 seconds when they finally toss it in. It goes into this waste, and then nothing. So it works. So they rush back, and they run over to Ray, and he smiles and brushes like the tears from Sophie's cheek, and then he drops his arm and he dies. Aww. I know, I didn't want him to die. I was hurt. So now Sophie gets a message, and she's still on the mountain. It says she's special agent in charge, and she's like reread this email like 20 times. So she was like immediately reinstated. And she's talking to Carter, and she's like, should I thank you for this? And he's like on crutches, and he's like, this is classified. So they're still in Italy, and like they're loading up the bodies no, they're not still on the mountain. This is probably like the next day. So they're loading the bodies up onto the plane. So Madeline is asking for Chris's body, like her dad's body. And while all this is going on, BTO blows a kiss at Sophie, and Carter goes, that mustache looks like it tickles. And she goes, a little.
Oh?
So somewhere in the midst of all this, they done had a kiss or something. I'm like, okay. And Carter says, like, I'm going to be stuck here for a while helping with the cleanup. And he hands her an envelope, and it's Maria's U.S. adoption papers for Sophie to be her legal guardian. And another cop is lifted into the plane, and Maria says, that's Ray. And Sophie says, no, that's Grandpa. The end.
Aww.
I know. I didn't want Ray to die. I was like, I was hoping they were going to be able to
be a big happy family.
To fix it. Ugh. So, anyways. So, what did you rate it? Now that you know how it ends.
Yeah, because I didn't quite get to the end before we recorded this. I honestly would probably say a 3.
That's what I gave it. I gave it 3. It's hard to get into. I would say like this last 50% is where like all the action pops off, and it really gets good. I told Keely, I was like, there's so many, and you might feel this way after listening, there's too many storylines, I feel like. So it makes it hard. Like I don't like that, because I feel like as soon as I start like getting in, like, and the chapters were really short in this book. So it was like, as soon as I was like kind of getting into it, it was like, boop, another person. And I'm like, dang it. And I get it. I do. But like, I feel like I don't think we need a BTO's perspective. Like Glenn, like I get that these things are going on. But there was like a lot of that, and it was very educational.
Yeah. A lot of technical stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what I've struggled with a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was very eloquently written.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Very good writing.
Yeah, he does. Like if this is your jam, like this kind of like book, like you'll love it. Like he is definitely well researched. Like that was great. But I will say, like the second half of the book isn't as like there's not as much building at that point. So like it's action, and like I was like, okay, it's a go. But it was kind of like getting there. I was like, okay, like I gotta get there. But I definitely like the story. It just didn't but a 3 is still good. Like I'm not saying it's bad. Yeah. Like it just didn't like grab me immediately. But no, I think like especially for our first book, this is like great. But yeah, so like the multiple like too many storylines for me, and then like the beginning is just kind of hard to digest. But like once it started going, like I like the story. I did see the twist coming, like with the police captain, because I was like, like somebody in here is not right. I didn't know that was gonna be her son. Like I didn't get that part. But I felt like there was something with her. Yeah, so and I hated that. I mean, I know it's good writing for Ray to die, but I'm like, I hated that he died. Like, why didn't David die? Or Ken? I don't even know what happens to them. They're just, I don't know. We don't even know what happens. I assume they go to jail. Like, I don't know. I don't know what happens to them. What else? So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Do we have other thoughts? I don't know. Oh, are there reviews on this yet?
There are, but there are, let's see. When I was looking, there's not really any negative reviews.
Well, that's good. See? That's great.
Yeah, so I think the majority of the reviews are 4s and 5s that have written reviews. So yeah. Overall,
well, you're killing it, Don. You are killing it. So I mean, yeah, like I definitely like, again, if you like James Patterson, if you like Dean Koontz, if you like, is it John Grisham?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, like this is definitely your jam. I don't know what I was doing as a kid reading those books, but yeah, and maybe it's because my brain has melted over the years that it is harder. And I would say, like, I have ADHD. He's a newer author, so there's not an audiobook. You guys know I love an audiobook. So when I have to, like, actually read, sometimes it's hard because I'm, like, fidgety and my hands need to be doing something. That also is, like, that's just a me problem, not a him problem at all. But I definitely, like, I enjoyed it. Like, I immediately, like, and before I even read this book, like, I told you guys on the last episode, like, the first, like, page or whatever, I was like, oh, this is giving me James Patterson. Like, and I like that. So, like, I mean, yeah, like, I'm curious to see, like, what else he writes, because, like, it's only up from there. I'm not an author. I said it before. I'm not here to tell you, like, you're very well, like, researched and well written. So it's just, like, getting, like, that editing and, like, working on those things. I think it'll be amazing. He might have, like, 1,000 series like James Patterson one day. So I definitely think there's a place in the world for this. I think it's good.
Yeah. And the cover?
Oh, I haven't. Oh, yeah, I have. I've seen it.
The cover is, I really like the cover.
Yeah, no, it is super nice. So whoever designed your cover, like, shout out to them. I'm trying to. What is going on here? Let's see. There we go. Okay, so we're chugging along. We're in March now. Oh, I guess we were in March last week, but it's February when we record, so you guys are in March. All right, so our next episode is a reread for me. I think it's a first time read for you. How much do you know? I can't wait to actually just, like, talk about it more next week.
Wait, which one is it?
A Touch of Darkness.
Yes, so this is a first time read for me.
Yeah, so next week we're going to be doing A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, and I am a absolute simp for, like, Greek mythology. I'm also going to Greece when I go to Rome. So I'm like, and this is, I mean, it's different, but, like, I love like Greek mythology, especially like fiction, like fantasy stuff that's written. This is a romance, fantasy, whatever. So, yeah, I'm excited, and I love Hades in this one. I love a Hades. I love a Hades. This is like a re-seeing. Like,
okay, well, you know, now that we're on the topic, I've not really dove into, like, mythology, period.
Oh.
And it's something that I'm wanting to, so that's cool. But one of my all-time favorite Disney movies is Hercules.
I love Hercules.
And Hades was one of my favorite characters.
I love him. You know what's crazy? This is so off topic. I was on TikTok today. Somebody made the Herc sandals.
No way.
Yes. And they were like, they put in the comments, "You're wearing his merchandise?" When Hades was 16.
I love that.
So I can't wait for next week to, like, plug all of my mythological, like, thoughts and opinions on that one. So yeah, okay. I won't say anything else because I'm saving it for next week. So, all right. I think that's all I have. So as always, make sure you are following us on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Booktrospective. Please like and share and rate and review our episodes. We really, really appreciate it. We're still climbing. We're still climbing. So share it with a friend. Make them listen to us. They'll love us once they do. So make sure you're doing that. And I think that's all I got.
That's all I got.
All right. Bye.